Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another Leadership Masterclass. My guest today is Tom Castley, someone who I had the luck and the pleasure of getting to know at a conference in Prague, Web Expo. If you have no idea what that is, please look it up because it's also amazing. Who at the time was the vice president of the EMEA region for Outreach, which is one of the world's, if not the world's, leading sales engagement platform. Tom, thank you so much for being here with us today. I am really looking forward to hearing from you and hearing some bits and pieces of your experience.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, and I have very fond memories of our meeting in Prague. You were somebody that enthused me when we were talking, so it's a pleasure to be on this podcast.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Now, as we were discussing beforehand, we agreed on some topics. We discussed about what would be relevant and what's not. And you made a point that piqued my interest because you mentioned management on one side and leadership on the other side. And I know that these two areas tend to get confused quite a bit by managers and leaders themselves too. So why, in your opinion, is it so relevant to separate the two? And on the other hand, what happens if managers or leaders don't?
Yeah, good. But so where this came about is a couple of days ago, I saw a short snippet on LinkedIn. Or it actually might have been TikTok, which I don't normally go to for business information. But anyway, and this person said, and I'll butcher it, won't paraphrase it particularly well, but said management is the skill of having a goal and driving people towards those goals until it's complete, and managing that process. Leadership is about creating a vision and then inspiring people to buy into that vision and to go on the journey with you. And I really liked that. One is because it made leadership sound really cool and management sound a bit old hat. But also, as I've kind of noodled on it over the last couple of days, it's got me thinking just the working environment we're in now, where every company is proud to be hybrid and it's, work when you want, work the way you want, and what have you, actually has removed a lot of the tools that managers would have used in the past to create action, whether that's through supervision, ordering, and so on and so forth. And if you're not leading, if you can't share a vision, if you can't have that vision co-owned by the people who you work with, and and they won't follow you and they won't buy into that vision, you're going to struggle in what is a very distributed workforce now that has a lot of choice, wants to grow, wants to learn. If you think about the majority of the workforce now is millennial, it's not just about turning up to work and taking home a paycheck. They want to feel like they belong, like they join, and all the rest of it. It just had me really focus in on actually maybe there's not a choice anymore between leadership and management. Maybe management's just dead, and unless you're in like a highly regulated environment where you have to have uh, tons of controls and procedure, maybe for safety reasons and what have you. But in general commerce, my statement would be management is dead. Long live the leader.
It's actually interesting because this, what you mentioned about steering towards leadership and using leadership skills more and more in a hybrid world is something I was reasoning about as well lately on the fact that sure, relationships and leading via relationship and connecting personally to people that work with you is becoming more and more relevant. But
Mm.
when you say that a lot of the management tools have been taken away, I have the feeling that with the change of relationships, basically not being in the office but being hybrid, also a lot of tools that were connected to leadership have also shifted. Basically, we now need to be able to build and maintain a relationship also remotely, which is
Mm.
a whole different setup, and probably also implies one key characteristics that maybe not all managers or leaders have at this point, which is the ability to recognize where this change is going, whether change will be happening, and if not reacting to it, anticipating it. Basically, taking action and saying, I personally do not have these skills. I need to change the way I work. I need to adapt. Otherwise, this is just not going to work. I don't have the right setup for it. And I see some companies working with this, or some organizations letting managers do it independently, which sometimes is a nice way of saying basically abandoning them to their destiny, and some others basically taking more actions and trying a more structured and training based approach. Um, you mentioned beforehand that change is tough. What makes it tough, do you think, also in this specific context?
Uh, if I can, just before we go on to that, you've got
Yeah.
me. This is why I love talking with you. So you've got me thinking around that kind of leadership and management side of things. So I remember somebody said to me once again on leadership. Leadership is measured by the amount of discretionary effort that you can get from the people you work with over time. So in other words, do they freely and willingly give you additional effort? That's great leadership. That means they're following you. Yeah, you're like the Pied Piper. And when everybody was in the office, you had the right. You also had the mechanisms to control the focus of that individual for the period of time they were in the office. So you had 100% kind of control over what they were doing, or how long their lunch breaks were, when they arrived at the office, when they left. Now, the moment everybody went home, they've got distractions, and now you don't have that control. And unless you relinquish that, which means getting rid of all of your old management principles, you now have to get into away from lazy management and into exemplar leadership. So, when you talk about building relationships with people over time, is recognizing that somebody's working day has now maybe fundamentally changed. Maybe they do the school run with their children 8:30 till 9:30. That's normally when most initial stand-up meetings happen during the day. So now I have to try and configure, and when you've got a team of 25, 30 people, there's probably no point during the day when everybody's available by choice. So how do you operate in that, smaller meetings and so on and so forth? Just something for the audience to think about, maybe another podcast in time. But you're right, we've gone through just an inordinate amount of change over the last 2 or 3 years. There's one positive spin on that, which is through the enforced change that we've all been through. Don't think for a minute as a leader that your teams aren't used to change. They've been doing it. They've actually become experts in change in themselves. So actually, you could say that now is the time to implement more change than you've ever done before, because you have an audience that's already in motion. You have a team that's gone through this kind of chrysalis moment, from caterpillar to butterfly, and maintain that momentum. The the biggest mistake I see outside of sales teams that kind of live with change is that because change is difficult, it's left too late, so it becomes big, and then it also becomes urgent. And when it's urgent, it's typically top down and done to people, which creates resistance and friction. There is it's a good exercise to do. Actually, I've done it before. I've kind of gone into a change workshop with some people before, where I get folks to get somebody from the audience to come up and stand with me, and I give them no instructions whatsoever, other than to just say, "Put your hands out a second." When they put their hands out, what I do is I put my hands on theirs and I just start pushing. Now, what do you think they do? They
I
push
would,
back.
yeah, I would guess they push back.
Yeah, with no instruction whatsoever, they try and hold their position. Then I do another example where I take the same person and say, right, come and stand beside me here, and I carry on talking to them, and I slowly start to walk forwards next door to them. No instruction whatsoever, because I'm talking to them, they start walking with me. And so figuratively, what I'm explaining there is, if I do a change to somebody, they will naturally react. If I do a change with somebody, they come along with you because they're part of it. And so when you take that, so one is it's big change. It's typically done to them, so there'll be some resistance. I would advocate that actually change just needs to happen more often in smaller steps. And for change to happen more often and to be done with them, who should be the instigator of the change? And it's not the leader. You disseminate change decisions to the people who are working with you. And one of the best ways of doing that is to share with them the vision and then to ask them how they would go about doing that. And there are various published frameworks about how to do that, which is, the two or three this week. So having shared a vision of where we need to get to. Look, here's the situation we find ourselves in. I need to be able to eloquently explain that as a leader. The first question you get the groups as they go off into different rooms to do, virtually or physically, is what do I think the ultimate aim of the business is? Get them to restate it. Because hilariously, as clear as I think I am, the last time I did this, I sent 7 groups out, and 7 groups came back with different versions of what the ultimate aim was. So I literally told you 10 minutes ago what it was. So they get to collectively get alignment around that. Then what is my role in that? That creates both people who have a set of what they think is expected of them, but it also gives them freedom of expression to expand their sphere of influence and to volunteer for other roles in that change, which is highly rewarding as a leader, but also very exposing because you then start to find where people's aspirations, wants, and desires are. And then the third question you get them to answer is, and what outcomes would be expected if we were to succeed in that? And then you start to see by the different groups of people how they're starting to think about their element of this. And when they talk to each other about it, what they then start to realize is if there's clashes or if there's overlap or if there's things aren't going to work well together, and that's where you start to create that clarity and alignment.
It's fascinating because it's almost this is probably the most practical example of what I hear and read and from everywhere about the leader taking more and more the role of a coach. So the way I see it, you're not telling the teams what to do, you're facilitating the discussion, letting them figure it out by themselves. Maybe you already know the solution or whatever is happening beforehand, but you let them carry the discussion and maybe you steer it towards one side or another. But um, on one hand, I find it fascinating and I find it extremely useful. On the other hand, connecting what you were saying at the very beginning, I can count a few managers. I can list them in my head right now that will be extremely uncomfortable in giving their teams so much free reign about the what needs to be done, what should be done, because maybe it's an exposure, a fear of being too open. The other one is a fear of losing too much control. But then again, as you said, you need to relinquish some level of control. So this is probably all going towards the same direction.
Yeah,
So
there's not, and look, there's no. Yes, they are. The only thing they're relinquishing control on is what is going to be the method by which the vision or the outcome is going to be achieved. And I'm a huge fan. I'm wildly dyslexic, so cognitive diversity is a passionate project of mine. But if you don't have diversity of thought, then the potential for finding better solutions or different solutions to drive potentially outcomes which are way in excess of what you thought was possible are limited by the leader just imparting their experience. And what I found is, especially in this current world, like, forecasting over the last couple of years has been really interesting as a sales leader because the rule book got ripped up. So actually, I was being held back. I had my legs tied together because I was using my 25 years of forecasting experience previously to try and forecast an environment which was dimensionally different to anything I'd ever experienced. So in actual fact, if we'd implemented what I thought, we'd definitely get the wrong solution. I actually needed to go to people who'd never forecast before and give them the problem because they were living in the moment of this new world and the solutions they came up with were phenomenal.
Mhm.
So the only thing the leader is doing is detaching them from the methodology or the methods they're going to be used to drive an outcome. And I think for people who enjoy leadership, uh, the joy that you get from learning from people who work from you and their ingenuity and their ideas and their thoughtfulness far outweighs the joy of teaching somebody how I did it.
That makes extreme sense. Also, because one of the areas that I love working with is creativity. Not in terms of
Mm,
painting, music,
mm.
amazing stuff, but I mean it in terms of how do you reliably and predictably have good ideas? What method is there? How do you gather ideas from people? And what you said about diversity, cognitive diversity, picking up different uh, ideas and not relying on only what you know is one of the, well, simplifying of course, one of the major ways where you can really get a breakthrough. So it's quite, I mean, probably we could open up a few hours of discussion on this one as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
but
There's a good book for the audience. It's a book called this is Dave Marquette Turned the Ship Around. Dave Marquette was a
okay.
submarine commander in the U.S. Navy, and the 30-second version of that was normally a submarine commander takes commission of a sub, having studied it for 3 or 4 years, and they know more about that sub than anybody else. So in other words, you can create this hierarchy of, literally giving orders or people seeking permission. And it's the captain that provides the yes, no to anything that happens on the boat. And it creates a huge bottleneck. Where he found himself was the ship that he was taking over. They changed the class of submarine with 6 months to go, so he had no time to learn it. So he wasn't in the position to be able to provide permission because he didn't have the knowledge by which to determine whether that was a good decision or not. And this is a nuclear submarine. So he moved from permission to intention. So basically, everybody who worked with him on the sub came to him with an intention. We intend to turn the submarine to 210 degrees north. And then his job was to interrogate that intention to make sure it's a well-formed decision and that they thought about everything as a result of it. And that becomes incredibly empowering. And so not relinquishing any control, because nothing happened without his approval, but they weren't seeking permission. They came with the solution already and they thought about it. And that, um, to your point, doesn't take away the control of the leader. Again, actually, I think it gives them more control, and it also gives them um, potential to deliver far better outcomes, because again, they're building the people up around them to be self-sufficient and better. Um, I've said to junior leaders who've worked for me, I said that there's three things that need to happen for you to get promoted. Number one is you need to be ready for your next role. So you need to work on a plan, because I'm not going to feed it to you. I'd like you to come to me with your plan on how you investigate what your gaps are and how you're going to develop those gaps to be ready for your next role. So that's number one. Number two is we need to have that role available for you. So there's a timing element to it. I said number three, and the most important one, is you need to be replaceable. And that's the one that I've found some people from some backgrounds really struggle with, because there's job security and not being replaceable. I'm absolutely integral to my team and all the rest of it. But if they don't have somebody who can replace them, why on earth would I put them into another position? Because it's going to impact my business. And uh, so great leaders make themselves redundant very quickly.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm literally seeing past managers and even professors at university that would literally clash head to head with you on these points. But I'm fully on your side with this. Plus, by the way, I think you did mention both the book and these 3 points when we met back in the days. But it's always good to re-hear them because I had completely forgot about them. I'll make a note, mental note to look them up.
Yeah.
Uh, as you were talking, though, I noticed that the conversation shifted more and more about not so much the role of the leader, but also in terms of the team that surrounds the leader. So you're, in a way, you're just as good as the people that work with you or that work around you.
Yeah.
However, that opens up a different discussion for me. It's not, as a manager, the you or leader at this point, you are expected to know how to grow and to develop your team. That is should be an expectation. And you said you gave these 3 points as also a way of showing how people could grow. But I think there is also another part that we mentioned might go overlooked sometimes, which is hiring, because most of the time we associate hiring with HR or
Mm.
HR managers. They're the one that hold the power of knowing who to hire and how to hire. Um, do you think there people should know more, managers should get more interested in hiring the right people? They should instead rely more on HR, or basically, what's your take on this? Because we don't talk about this enough.
Yeah, so it's my number one bugbear at the moment.
Okay,
The
fantastic.
the number one job of leaders is to hire great people. Period. And the first mistake anybody does is they disseminate that off to different people and they don't take ownership of it. And the reason they don't take ownership of it is if they hire somebody who's not fit for purpose, it falls on them and there's nowhere to hide. So something as critical and as important as hiring, I'm bemused by the fact that leaders will delegate that out to people. They won't develop their own skills. They won't develop the skills of the people they're delegating it to bring people into a business. And yeah, I just find it abhorrent, frankly. Um, and if I use a cooking analogy, and we talk about if people are the ingredients, I don't know if we have this series in the UK called Masterchef, where they take up and coming. Sometimes they've got a Michelin star, but they're up and coming chefs who are definitely going to be like 2-star Michelin chefs at some point. And what I found intriguing when I first started watching that show was only about half of the show was on cooking. The other half, they went to great lengths to 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 show the the level of effort and time that these chefs took in sourcing their ingredients. You know, they knew the farmer. They visited the fields. Um, they went to the abattoirs. They went to this. They saw the butchers. They looked at the entire supply chain, and you had this. You know, in most cooking competitions, what happens is somebody is able to cook, and then what they do is they overcomplicate everything, and they put 50 million ingredients in, and it's just too much. And then phenomenal chefs put 3 ingredients on a plate, and the person who's consuming the food, their mind is blown. And it's not just how well they've cooked it, coached, led. It's their selection of the ingredients and the balance of those that go together and how they work. And I would implore anybody who's in leadership now or going into leadership to make sure that the same as the chefs spend 50% of their time looking at their ingredients and sourcing where they get from. If you're growing a team and you're not spending 50% of your time either looking for ingredients, new people to join your team, or enhancing your skills to identify those and to interview them and to be able to select the best ingredients for your business, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Definitely. And if I mirror what you're saying based on things I work with and what I also refer to other managers that I work with, it's it's about mm, this is part of you being able as a manager. Correct me if you're not if you don't agree with this. This is also part of your ability as a manager to gain the trust ethically of people that work for you or that work in your team. Let's put it this way.
Well,
Because
if you've got phenomenal people, the job of leadership gets very easy.
very true. Also very true. What I was going more in that sense is the fact that if I see that and we're also going back to the diversity in the team in terms of skills, if I see that whoever I have put in the team, the ingredients that I've selected are the best possible ones for the job, and I recognize this around, this also tells me that you are a good leader because you can select the right people for the job. which
Yeah.
also goes back to looking around, having an eye for who can be the relevant one, looking for talent, scouting talent, and building the team. So uh, that's an interesting perspective as well. I'll try to remember the Master Chef analogy
Mm.
because I like it. And Tom, just closing off because I think we're almost out of time. I put myself in the shoes of someone listening to this episode and looking at you with your experience and what you've accomplished and what you're mentioning. And this person is someone who is just starting off in his or her role of manager, leader, team lead, you name it. If there were three actionable tips or just any number to a limited amount of practical tips that you could share with this person, what would be your most relevant ones?
I'll just go with one, and I'll
Okay,
spend time talking about it. So I'm a huge fan of situational leadership. So just search for that on Google and you'll find it. And you'll probably find a Boston box of four things where it says S1, S2, S3, S4. I think it was popularized in the 80s, and I'd love it to become popular again. So let me describe where that goes. And I'm going to slightly talk from a salesy angle because that's my experience for this.
amazing.
But S1 is go away, do that, and come back when you're finished. And so it's very autocratic, very kind of task led. Yeah. S2 is let me show you how I would do it. S3 is let me help you to do it your way. And S4 is go away, come back at the end of the year when you've done your number, right? And the the place where leaders live is in S3. They help people to do it their way. So that in sales, in particular, oftentimes the best salesperson gets promoted into sales leadership, and the trap they get caught in is living in S2. Sales rep comes to them and says, I've had this objection. What would you do? Well, what I would do is I would say this, and then I'd say this, and then I'd say that. Oh, fantastic. Thanks. And off they go and do it. And what you do is you just basically create this infinite loop that doesn't scale, where the sales leader is just basically being asked questions as the font of all knowledge the whole time, and the team never improves. They could become subservient to that. And so the good sales leaders will say, well, what do you think? What have you thought about? And why did you come up with that? And what are some of the other things you could consider? What have some of your colleagues said? And so on and so forth. By the way, the super great sales leaders, there's a 3+, which if somebody comes up with a great idea and it works and they roll it out, is to create an environment on a weekly basis, ideally, where the people who've come up with something and have rolled it out and it's been successful are given the opportunity to teach it to somebody else so it doesn't come from the leader. I say the progression of knowledge goes from understanding or knowing to using, which becomes very deliberate and quite awkward. Yeah, a bit like riding a bike. Yeah, so okay, I know what I need to do to ride a bike. Yeah, I have to pedal the pedals. Then I first do it, and it's a bit awkward, and then I live it. I don't have to think about it, and then the next level is can I teach it? And if you can create environments where your teams are teaching each other constantly, you know that they're already living it and they're working through it and what have you. So it's that S3 place is the place to live. Now, the final caveat that when you hire somebody, you naturally have to start in S1, that's onboarding, S2, because they just don't have the knowledge or experience to be able to formulate a decision, but you need to quickly get them to S3. And very few people, even the most experienced sellers I've worked with in the past, want to live in S4. They kind of live just on the boundary. Maybe they have one foot in S3 and one in S4. They still want to be able to come back to you to ask your counsel, but don't micromanage them.
That's amazing. I'm also a huge fan of situational leadership, but I've never heard it described from a sales perspective in your way, and am pretty sure it's as interesting for me as it is for anyone listening. Tom, thank you so much for sharing your precious time with me. Thank you so much for being on the show and sparring a few friendly virtual punches with me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Tom, best of luck to you. Hopefully, talk soon. Would love to get you on the show back sometime. But in the meantime, Thank you so much for being here with us.
Pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.